with respect to global education. The goal is was said for today is to really kind of share a plethora of resources for you all, showcase how we do things at Winton Woods and the Academy of Global Studies, as well as hopefully provide you with some takeaways, not only from us, but from each other, and the ideas that you may bring to the table to be able to just share those ideas, which is really how we advance global education. So what we're going to do here today is just kind of have a brief setup. We're going to introduce you to some resources. We have a little activity on a Padlet. I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat box right now. On this Padlet, and you can feel free to click on the link while I'm talking. On this Padlet, there's a plethora of resources. These resources could be aligned with a specific subject area or grade level, or they might be able to be connected to multiple subject areas and grade levels. So in order to kind of get the ball rolling today, all we ask that you would do is go to the Padlet, take a look at the resources, and I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can see them as well on the webinar. And I want you to try to figure out which specific grade level or which class you see these most being connected to. So for instance, if I looked at this one right here, it's a really easy one, World Music for Kids. I could easily click on this link. It could bring me to a great resource with respect to it. And based upon what I glance over and skim, I might be able to add a comment right now and say, hey, I think this is great for music classes at the K-6 level. So what we would ask that you do, and Andy, feel free to go ahead and interject as well, is go ahead and take a look at these resources, choose a couple to just click on, and then go ahead and leave a comment with respect to what grade level or subject area you think they most connect with. And Andy, feel free to interject.
I think he just cut out on us, but hi guys, I'm Andy Locke. Another thing I just want to add on to this, you might see some resources that you want to use in your own class. Do not fret. You'll have access to anything that's on this page, as well as other things that we will show you. We will give you this collection at the end. So don't stress about trying to save things right now that you think you might use in your own classroom. Just kind of follow along with the activity and just know that you'll have all these resources with you to take home. Josh, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
You cut out for a second, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah. When I shared my screen, the Padlet kind of froze me a little bit, so that's why I stopped sharing real quick.
If you want, I'll go ahead and share my screen and see if that helps.
It'd be awesome.
Yep. All right. So we should be good to go now. Again, you're just going to go through these resources, see a few of them, click on them, and decide what grade level you think it would be good for, maybe what subject matter you think it would work well in.
And for those who haven't done so already, feel free to go ahead and put in the chat box as well, kind of what grade level you currently teach or what your role is right now, what subject matters you most are interested in. We've really geared today towards a multitude of subject levels. So regardless if you're math or science or history or English or languages or fine arts even, we want to make sure that we really provide you the information that's going to be specific to your personal needs.
I see one of the comments down here. I use this site for AP Human Geo on population, and they're talking about the worldpopulationhistory.org website. It's awesome.
I also see the SDG tracker. Someone went ahead and said that they think that this site is useful for any discipline, regardless of the subject area.
I like this fairy tales resource here. I'm going to go ahead and add here that it's probably good for PK through 2nd grade.
And I think the great thing too, as you kind of glance through these resources, is that some of these, honestly, when we were preparing for this webinar, are ones that I personally forgot about that I had. And so, you go back into your kind of just list of resources, because there are so many around global ed. You're like, oh, wow, I forgot that was a thing. Maybe it didn't make sense 3 or 4 years ago, but maybe now it does make sense with respect to the classes you currently teach, or, the progression you've had in your education career. So that's what's really cool about these resources as well, is even if they may not connect right now, they might in the future.
I see one of our friends here put this source looks good for ELA classrooms when referring to the globalizing K-12 reading lists, which is wowlit.org. Great site there.
Give you about 1 more minute here to kind of glance through, and then we will highlight some of these resources specifically. We're going to share with you a couple of example lessons with respect to how we've included the resources in an ELA classroom, social studies, math, and science. And then we're going to have a little activity where we can have some takeaways together.
I'm assuming it was Jenny that teaches AP Human Geo that also put the Unequal Scenes site for AP Human Geo. Another great resource. I've actually used that one in my classroom, so we'll talk a little bit more about that one here in a little bit.
Welcome to the Cleveland Council on World Affairs. Appreciate you attending today. I originally grew up about an hour west of Cleveland, so relatively well known with respect to the different suburbs and whatnot, because my dad was a teacher up there too.
All right.
All right, so team, the idea around these resources is being able to go ahead and first understand how you can see this connecting into your classroom. So some of us may have been trying to do global education for a long time. Some of us may just be dipping our toes in the water. What I always like to say is it's really great to start small, and once you get comfortable with that, scale up. So maybe that just means in the context of a year, you do 1 lesson or 1 unit or 1 project around global ed. Once you get comfortable with it, then you can start to expand it and hopefully eventually be able to do every single one of your units in a global standpoint and global lens, using the global competencies and the global competence matrix. What we have done is created a kind of an organized list of these resources. This was just kind of a glimpse of what we have and what we're going to showcase today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post, again, just a link to our Wakelet. I believe you already have that.
I just did.
Oh,
yeah, I just dropped it.
Buddy. So the link to the Wakelet is going to be there. And Locke, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen of the Wakelet, that'd be great. So once you go to Wakelet, first off, it's a great tech tool to be able to really organize resources. You can organize PDFs, videos, you can organize digital websites. I know some people in the past used to have like a Google Doc where they just link everything in a Google Doc. This is just great and visually appealing with respect to how to quickly find a resource that you remember hearing about, but don't necessarily remember exactly what it was called. So while Locke scrolls here on the website, notice we have columns for each of these different resources. So we have a math column, a science column, we have ELA, we have social studies, and then we have what we're considering non-core global resources. So that would be your languages, your fine arts. Also keep in mind that many of these resources, like I like the person who said with the SDG tracker, they can be used throughout all disciplines. They don't necessarily have to be in that discipline. A lot of these can be used cross-disciplinary in a cross-disciplinary way. But this is a great idea to be able to go ahead and go back to resources that are organized by subject matter, simply because that's how a lot of teachers' minds work. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pass it off to Locke here. He's going to describe a couple of the resources with respect to ELA and history, and maybe some of even the non-core global resources. I'll go ahead and talk about the math and science resources, and then we're going to introduce you to a couple of lessons that we've done on the resources themselves.
All right, can you hear me? All right, great. So I did have to unshare in order to unmute myself, and I'm going to be switching screens a little bit. So if you're with me, what I'm going to do now is kind of just drop another link into the chat. This link is going to be a set of Google Slides. You do have editing access to these slides, but we do ask that you don't edit anything quite yet. What we're going to do is kind of just go over a few things and then explain our next steps in that process. All right, so give me 1 second. Sorry, we were telling Michelle and Melissa earlier that we are Google Meet experts, not Zoom experts. So we're still trying to navigate the Zoom, but I think we are good. So what I just dropped in the chat now is a Google Slides presentation. And basically what we're going to do is kind of just go over the first few slides. I'm going to go ahead and try to share that again, and so you can follow along on my screen if that is what suits you better. Everyone good on that? All right. So again, our goal here was, to help create well-informed, responsible, and curious global citizens. So what we're going to do now is just take a look at how we have used some of the resources that we've shown you in that collection in our own classrooms to help create those well-informed, responsible, and curious global citizens. So again, my name is Andy Locke. I teach U.S. history at Winton Woods High School in the Academy of Global Studies. What's unique about my class, it is combined with the 10th grade English class in a class called American Studies. So all of their ELA content is kind of fused within the curriculum of U.S. history and what we call American Studies. A lot of times what we will do is combine what we are reading or learning about in English class with the content standards that I'm covering in U.S. history. So one of the resources that we provided to you earlier, and I had mentioned, was unequal scenes. So in the Google slides, you can see the link right there. I've clicked it. It's unequal scenes. You're going to find here is a website that presents a lot of photographs that show a vastly different setting in one frame. And the point of the photos is to bring to light the paradoxical perspectives that many neighbors may see growing up or living in certain areas. So what I did in our American Studies class is I had a project-based learning unit group, and this is just 8 students total that were focused on building a project around the living conditions in American cities during the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we were learning about tenements and slums. So what I did was showed them these present-day unequal scenes, and we related these living conditions to the past as well as the future and other places in the world that were not just focused on the United States, even though it's U.S. history. This allowed me to show them that though they have small homeless, maybe camps within their own neighborhoods or cities, homelessness and poverty look vastly different throughout the world. And what they might also consider homeless by looking at a picture isn't what those people that live there consider homeless as well. So we make a lot of global connections in our U.S. history class because we are in the Academy of Global Studies. And the way we do that is oftentimes incorporating the four domains of global competence, as well as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So this particular resource allows us to really investigate the world, which is the first domain from Asia Society's 4 domains of global competence. And students investigate the world beyond their immediate environment to help get a better understanding of the world they live in. We also connected this to the Sustainable Development Goals. If you're not familiar with those, there are 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that, as a world, we are trying to reach these goals in an effort to better the world. So these allow us to target our learning goals around goals that we have as a global community. So for this particular lesson, we really looked at SDG number 1, which is no poverty, and we looked at SDG number 3, which is good health, well-being, and then also SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and most specifically infrastructure and what cities look like throughout the world. So this is just a small lesson that we did, and I only did it with 8 students because this is what their focus was in a PBL classroom. Another one that I've used is Flipgrid Grid Pals. So I know a lot of us are very familiar with Flipgrid, but you might not have used it in the Grid Pal scenario. So Flipgrid is a simple, free discussion platform that makes learning fun, fulfilling, and empowering. When combining students with different schools, you create what you call a flip grid pal. So what we did is we teamed up with a school in South Brooklyn, New York, and they were covering U.S. history at the same time we were. So what we did is we kind of looked over the poem of White Man's Burden, which was incorporating now the ELA lesson into our classroom, and focusing on the poem of White Man's Burden, seeing what we felt it meant to us before we investigated U.S. history at the time that poem was written, and then what we felt it meant to us following learning about that time, and then kind of compared and contrasted our stories and see how they were similar and different based on the localities that we lived in. This activity hit on the domain of recognizing perspectives and communicating ideas. And then we really focused on the Sustainable Development Goal 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions in completing this activity. So you have to sign up for, or you have to log in with Flipgrid Grip House to see my students' posts, but you can do so if you want. I put the link there to show you. But we're looking at like 30-second video discussions that they trade back and forth with each other to kind of help get an understanding of how, even though we are very much alike in the fact that we are 16, we go to school at high school, we are in America, our understanding of our surroundings and everything around us could be very different. The next two are on Josh. He's going to tell you a little bit about his math and science aspects in this.
Yeah, and Locke, you can actually stop sharing your screen. I think I should be okay. So I'm going to reference the Wakelet a couple times as well here. So again, I'm Josh Amstutz. I am a teacher at the Academy of Global Studies, as well as the coordinator of the Academy of Global Studies. And I have taught pretty much every kind of math subject area that you could think of, all the way from a remedial math lab to Algebra 1, to geometry, to Algebra 2, to pre-calculus, and then to eventually combined classes, because we actually have 2 STEM combined classes at the high school, where kind of like the social studies and English are connected, the science and math are connected. So we have students for 2 bells a day in physical science and Algebra 1 for our freshmen. And then for our juniors and seniors, we have the option of having pre-calculus and physics with respect to a combined class that we call PCAP. So one thing I want to make sure that I reference here too is on the Wakelet, we have all these resources obviously for each of the different columns here, and I'm going to reference a couple of them in the math column. But at the very top, we have the specific global competence matrices for each subject area. So I know that at the beginning, Melissa shared the general global competence matrix, but if you look at each of these, I'm going to click on math, for instance, that math matrix is specific to what global competence looks like in the math classroom. I know that when we started out doing global education, sometimes it was really hard to say, hey, listen, here's what global ed looks like in one classroom, but how does it look like in a history classroom? Or how does it look in a science classroom? So what's really great about these rubrics are that they're specific to your content areas, so that you can understand the 4 domains: investigating the world, recognizing perspectives, communicating ideas, and taking action for your specific subject matter. With respect to my lessons, what I'm going to go ahead and highlight here is first a 9th grade. So a lot of times it's kind of hard sometimes to think about how you can incorporate not only project-based learning for 9th graders, but also project-based learning from a global standpoint. So the resource that I explored was called the Human Development Data Center. I'm just going to go ahead and click on that real quick to show you what this is. I love this resource simply because not only from a math standpoint, but generally speaking, just an understanding of how our world is working and the different inequalities that exist. This allows you to really organize the world based upon specific indicators. So for instance, if I go here to education and I go ahead and go to education index and I hit submit, that's going to load some data for me to be able to showcase what the education index is in countries from around the world. With respect to my example here, I used it in the context of focusing on a country specifically and how their education has advanced or declined over time. And the idea was, first, our students had to understand what is an education index, which helped them to understand SDG 4, quality education. But then in addition to that, they needed to try to figure out how they can take this massive table of data and be able to categorize it and organize it. So what I ended up doing is I had them go to desmos.com. They ended up choosing a country from that table. They went ahead and they went ahead and they organized it based upon the country index, and they created a plot of data where they had a whole bunch of data points going in a row. And what they had to do is use some statistical analysis to be able to find what's called the line of best fit. Or in essence, if they wanted to model how the education has changed over time, that's what they were trying to model. So the really cool thing is that a lot of times, even in my math classroom, students come in thinking it's a history classroom or a social studies classroom because there is so much global knowledge that's intertwined with the math. And the cool thing about this resource in this project is that it was done in our individual Algebra 1 classes, but also it was done in the context of physical science in these classes as well. The global connection, of course, is something that's really important, and that comes directly from the matrix. So what I had my students focus on was this idea of interpreting and applying the results of mathematical or statistical analyses. So that's, again, why I really like these rubrics, because these are specific ways, indicators, where you can say, hey, my classroom is global because my students were able to do X. And in this case, mine was this indicator right here. So instead of me just saying to the students, yes, we're investigating education around countries around the world, they're able to demonstrate how they actually interpreted and applied these results. So they're able to describe to me, hey, here's how I got the data. Here's what the data means. Here's how I actually made it visual. Here's how I made sense of that visual. And it really makes math come to life. And the cool thing about this is that much like Andy Locke's projects, this one focused on 2 different sustainable development goals. One was quality education, goal number 4. The other was goal number 10, reduced inequalities, because the point was to see what inequalities exist in education around the world. The next resource, or the next example that I have here, is one from an upper grade level. So this is from a pre-calculus in physics course. This one was physics oriented. So the resource that I did was the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. This is another really great resource here as it loads, because what it does is it provides students real life information about one of the subcommittees of the United Nations. So some of you may have known about the Sustainable Development Goals for a while, and you may have been using them for a while. The cool thing now is that with the United Nations, you can start going into each of the different subcommittees and see how those goals might come to life. So this specifically is the subcommittee for outer space affairs, because in this project, students had to figure out how to clean up space debris that is currently orbiting our planet Earth. Space debris that could possibly ruin the Webb telescope that's up there, could possibly hit the International Space Station and cause a hole or cause damage. So the idea is it's a real problem that the students are investigating how to solve. So this resource really allowed the students to focus on a country that was really cared about the idea of space debris, as opposed to a country that may not even have a space program, and that country wouldn't necessarily care about what happens in space. But in addition, it allows them resources to be able to choose that space agency and investigate what they are currently doing. So the really cool thing about this project with respect to a global connection is that our students were able to use these resources to develop partnerships among countries. So the idea of the project, or the lesson, was that the students had to create their own method of space debris collection. As the debris comes into their space debris collection item, they had to figure out how to do calculations so it stays in orbit, rather than gaining that extra mass and making it go out of orbit. How does it stay into orbit? And then they had to share their ideas to the other countries around the world, and they actually had to collaborate with those countries in a example UN simulation. So you had the European Space Agency teaming up with the United States, but you also had space agencies that were in Asia teaming up with other space agencies who were in the Middle East. So it's really cool for the students to see not only how science can come to life, how they can try to design this contraption that cleans up space debris, but also how they understand that really interconnective nature of space agencies around the world, and how you need to understand perspectives of another country. With that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it back to Locke so that he can go ahead and talk about what we are gonna do for our next piece of the webinar.
All right, so I do want to preface before we move forward, I do want to just state that Josh and I have been working in the Academy of Global Studies and really trying to emerge global citizenship into our classrooms, for as well as everyone else that we work with in that global studies academy for the past 8 to 10 years. So where we're at is not where we started, and it took a lot of time to get there. So what we're asking you to do next is start. So we're not asking you to come up with the best and the most polished piece of artwork that you're going to throw together and call it a lesson plan. What we're going to do is just get some juices flowing. So yeah, everything that you will have, or everything that we've given you, will be shared with anyone that's here right now, and it's yours to keep. So you have editing access to the Google Slides that we just showed you. What I'm going to do is share my screen again to kind of give you an idea of what we want you to do next, because we want this to be interactive and we want you to have something to take home. So those first 4 slides are examples of how we've actually used some of the resources we've provided you in our own classroom. Now what we're looking for you to do is take a turn. Pick a slide below. There's, I think, from 7 down to 22. Each participant, grab a slide, make it your own, and then find a resource that you think you would be able to use in your classroom. It's easier for social studies teachers to be like, oh, that's easy, it's social studies. Anything's global when it comes down to that. It's more than that, though. Like, beyond just those concepts, how can you connect this to the domains that the Asia Society has provided, the 4 domains of global competency? How can you connect this to a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal? How can you use this resource to help create well-informed, responsible, and global citizens? So again, you're just going to select a slide below, put your name on it so that no one else steals it, and then you're going to choose a resource from the Wakelet that we've provided you. Maybe even choose, to make it easier, pick your subject matter, and then you can scroll down and pick any of the resources that we provided, and then start thinking of a way that you can incorporate this into a lesson, activity, or your classroom. So describe the resource, link it right here. How do you think you will use it in your classroom? And then what SDGs or domains does it connect to help you start thinking about how to create those global citizens. The goal here is, 1, to get your own juices flowing, to get you started in an activity, but at the same time, everyone else is doing that, and you will have even more examples or more thoughts to move forward with as you leave the workshop, and have tools to take back to your classroom. So I think we are going to give you about 10 to, was that all right? About 10 minutes? Yeah, about 10 minutes or so to begin that process. We don't expect you to completely have this polished within 10 minutes, but just get those juices flowing, those ideas going.
And while you guys are working, just because I know sometimes on webinars, I like to be actively working, but I also am listening in the background as well. What I plan on doing is sharing just a couple more resources from the Wakelet, just in case you need a little bit more inspiration to get your mind started, to like visually see what these resources are. I'm going to choose to share a couple, and then Locke will share a couple, just so, again, we're constantly just providing you with information and feedback and guidance as you work on your slide for the next 10 minutes, or as you just want to listen in and see what kind of resources there are. So I'm going to go ahead. Go ahead.
If you're not I was just going to say, if you're not the type to be able to work while people are talking, just mute us and come back at 4:45.
100%. That's a really great point. Thank you, buddy. All right, so I'll share again to get the Wakelet up here so that I can go ahead and showcase some things. So I really took charge here of the math and science resources. However, both of us are really knowledgeable about a lot of global resources, so we can probably talk about any subject. What I'm going to choose to do here is go ahead and highlight, let's see here, Gapminder was a really good one too. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to Gapminder. So Gapminder is one of my favorites probably for math education, simply because there is so much on it. So much like the SDG tracker, what Gapminder does is it takes an indicator. It takes something happening around the world, and it assesses how each country is doing with respect to that item. So the best kind of connection that I have with this is for those who read National Geographics. I'm a big National Geographic person. I've been a subscriber since I can remember, and I love all the visuals and graphics. So obviously you have like the color of the world regions, which is really, really great. You can organize by income groups, by the SDGs, by time. You have child mortality here, you have population, you have life expectancy. So with respect to this, we have life expectancy. So let's say in math, you need to have students focus on some data. The best way I found for students to do that is to really be giving them a country to focus on so that they can understand what the SDG or what the idea is with relation to that specific country rather than from the full scale. So if I look at like India, for instance, I see that this is income as it relates to life expectancy, which is really, really cool to try to see, hey, listen, does money really matter when it comes to life expectancy? With respect to India, obviously, that's going to have a very different analysis than if I go to someplace down here like the Central African Republic, where the life expectancy is extremely low, but also the income is extremely low. If I click on these little things right here, I can switch the indicator. So maybe I want to see if there's a relationship between child mortality and income. What I notice now is the income increases, child mortality decreases. Let's try one more. Let's see if maybe if I do, I don't know. I'm gonna go to economy. Of a person in a country. So the cool thing about Gapminder is it allows you to visually see what these things are. Because if you talk about life expectancy to a kid, infant mortality to a kid, if you talk about poverty rates to a kid, it's just a number to them. But if they see it visually, sometimes that can make things a little bit better. The only other tool that I want to go ahead and describe here, and I'll pass it off to Locke for the last 5 minutes, is going to go ahead and go to the science realm here. I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy right here, the Smithsonian Science for the Classroom. So Smithsonian has a lot of great resources as well for all subject areas. Obviously, this one is specific to science, though. So the cool thing is that it provides you with curriculum, it provides you with standards, it provides you with ideas, everything with relation to how you can incorporate global education into a science classroom. So for someone who's looking to do more than just do a lesson on global education in the science classroom, this is a really great option to be able to look at the curriculum, to be able to look at the goals and how they're trying to be innovative, but also from a teaching standpoint, look at the professional development opportunities so that not only can teachers get CEUs for their licenses, but they can also start to connect with other STEM educators around the country to be able to really capitalize off of other people's ideas. So those are the two that I just wanted to highlight here from a math and science standpoint, and then I'll pass it off to Andy for a ELA and history standpoint.
All right, and Michelle, I did see your comments. So I'll go quickly when we talk about some of the things that or the resources I love. All right, so I'm obsessed with Google Maps and Google Earth as tools to use in the classroom. I know one of the resources that we provided, and I did not make this one, but this is just kind of using Google Maps to explain the journey of Anne Frank and Elie Wiesel in both their novels as they went through. This author used Google Maps to kind of highlight the places that were talked about as they went through their journey. What I have done is used Google Earth in my classroom to use it as first off as a content exploration tool. So instead of reading the text to learn about U.S. imperialism, we take them on a tour using Google Earth. So I'm going to present this to kind of just show you, but let's say the first thing we're going to do is talk about, I believe it takes me to Alaska first. Yeah, so we'll go to Alaska and then they learn about imperialism in the Alaska and how that went down. But we go along through all the places. And I'm going to take you to specifically the Philippines because I want to show you one of the tools that makes me love Google Earth as a global competency tool is the little man. I'm not sure if anyone knows about the little man in Google, but if you take him and you drop him anywhere, what it will do is give you the street view of that area.